All right, everyone. So welcome to our webinar, Amplify Your Science by Creating a Plain Language Abstract. So first, a little bit about who we are. So we're part of AGU's Sharing Science program. My name is Shane Hamlin. I'm one of our two, core faculty in Sharing Science. And so quickly about me, I have a PhD in ecology. I did conservation biology work and research along those lines before leaving academia to do science policy and now do more science communication and outreach and teaching others how to do that as well. But I've written a fair number of abstracts in my day, so this is something that's near and dear to my heart.
And I'm Olivia Ambrogio, also one of the core Sharing Science staff here at AGU, also a biology PhD who ended up moving from the field of science to science communication. So yes, both of us recognize the joys and struggles of abstract writing.
So if you're not familiar with Sharing Science or AGU more broadly, so the American Geophysical Union, we're an Earth and Space Society of over 60,000 members, and within that, we are part of the Sharing Science program. And our whole goal is to provide scientists with the skills, tools, opportunities that they need to communicate their science to any type of audience, from legislators to members of the press to general non-scientists to other scientists. And we do this through a number of ways. You're in one of them. So we hold a number of webinars every year, but we also do workshops. We have a ton of online resources that we'll throw up links for at the end, and just kind of hands-on support. So even if you're not a member of AGU, the Sharing Science program, we are still here to help any scientist who is interested in communicating their science more broadly. So the reason why you all are here today, when thinking about communicating science in any capacity, or communicating for that matter, the first thing that you need to do is to think about your audience. Think about who you're actually talking to. And so before we kind of get into our audiences and who we think are some good ones to communicate to, just want to know, for those who are on the phone, on the computer, what are some audiences that you're interested in communicating to? And instead of everyone kind of hopping on the phone, on the GoToMeeting, the webinar tool, there should be a chat box, and you can chat to all, or chat to all entire audience. So I'm just interested in seeing some of your potential audiences, who you might be interested in talking to. And we'll take a few seconds and a little bit of time to kind of gauge who you all are interested in communicating to. This is really great. So we're seeing legislators, kids, industries, your neighbor, policymakers, outreach type events, farmers. It's really great for the ag community. Great. So this is really encouraging to see. We think that it's really valuable to communicate science to all types of different audiences, and so it seems like we have a really nice diversity of the scientific community. I understand that as well as a scientist myself. All right. So when we're thinking about communicating science just kind of more broadly outside of say, plain language abstracts specifically, there's a whole slew of different groups. And this is just a small sampling of the types of audiences that we help scientists communicate to. And I have up there the whole world, jokingly, but not really. With social media, you're communicating to literally anyone out there. But nature centers, museums, members of the press, policymakers, other scientists. So no matter what type of communication you're doing, thinking about who you're communicating to is really important. And so for specifically plain language abstracts, plain language summaries, I'll use the two interchangeably, kind of narrowed it down to three main audiences. Now, anyone who is willing to read them can read them, but when thinking about plain language abstracts, there's kind of three main audiences that we've narrowed it down to. So this would just be the non-science public, and this is the most general audience. This is anyone who might come across an abstract for a scientific study and be interested in reading it. But more specifically, might also be journalists. So journalists are always looking for new and fascinating science, and the more easily they are to read what an actual abstract is, what it's talking about, what the science is talking about, the more likely they are to pick it up and actually want to write about it and want to interview the scientists. And then finally, another audience can just be other scientists. I know that I personally was in a general biology department that cut across microbiology the whole way over to ecology, and I personally didn't understand a lot of my colleagues a lot of times, and that was the case for everyone in the department. So just communicating to other scientists can be really important as well. So we have these audiences, and so you know who you're going to talk to, but how do you do that? How do you actually connect with them? Well, it's really important to think about a few things. First, you want to think about your goals. You want to think about...
Shane, I'm going to jump in here because this
is
where the poll was. So the question is, which of the following do you think is most important when crafting a plain language summary? And you have four options there. Your goals, your audience's goals, or your group's goals, your audience's demographics, or your audience's values, interests, and concerns. And I'm going to leave it open for just a few more moments while everyone gets a chance to respond. And I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. And here are the results. We've got 13% say your goals are the most important, 12% say your audience's goals, 15% think that it's the demographics, but then the bulk of everyone, 60% said your audience's values, interests, and concerns. All right.
Great, thanks, Nathaniel. And so that's really helpful and super interesting because, frankly, it's all of these things. But your group's values, interests, concerns, this is really the nitty-gritty of what they care about. This is like the most specific part of what makes them them. And so that's really great that a lot of you are really focusing on that because you're really getting down to the specifics of what makes up a group. But all of these things, from what your group wants and what your group wants to get out of it, but also what you want to get out of it. It's really important because you want to believe in what you're doing, and you want to kind of have a reason for why you're doing what you're doing. And when you've connected with your audience, and when you're thinking about connecting with your audience, you want to frame your research in a way, or your science message, or whatever it might be, in a way that matters to this group. Why will they care about it? And little side note, this comic here is actually from Olivia, and she likes to say that it's from painful personal experience. And I can certainly relate to this as well. So our first group is non-science public. And again, this is the most broad kind of general group. But the question you want to ask yourself is, why does your research matter? Like, why would it matter to whatever group you're talking to? Would that group care about hurricane behavior and businesses? And are they homeowners and they care about their residences? Are they, say, skiers or snowboarders? And so they're going to care about snowpack and how I'm from Pennsylvania. And we don't get as much snow as we used to. And so I can really see why people would care about that. Heat waves. We are in DC right now going through the hottest part of summer so far. And I am not super happy about my electric bill because of my air conditioner. Or just even shifts in start of spring, start of fall, winter, whatever it might be, and how that affects just how we enjoy the environment. So finding what your audience cares about is the first step. Like, why are they going to care about your message? Another audience are journalists. So a lot of times journalists will pick up on science stories they find interesting, and one way to do that is through plain language abstracts. You write your abstract in a way that is compelling, that is straightforward, that is accessible, and they can pick that up. One thing, if you're interested in journalists picking up your work, the first question you need to ask yourself is my science newsworthy? And this isn't asking whether your science matters or not, or whether it's important. That's not what this is about. It's about, is it newsworthy? So previously unknown results, advance the field significantly. Does it impact our daily lives? Are the readers or the listeners of that news outlet going to think, oh yeah, this is something that affects me? Does it relate to current events? Is there eye-catching imagery or videos or something? Maybe it goes against the grain, but not like in a nihilist way or something like that. So it's important to ask yourself first, is it newsworthy? And if it's not newsworthy, it doesn't mean it's not good science by any means, but journalists, members of the press just might not be as interested in it. So when thinking about crafting an abstract and you realize, oh, this might not be necessarily newsworthy, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that maybe that's not your audience. And finally, another audience or potential audience could just be other scientists. And this could be for a few reasons. One, I just kind of mentioned before about my personal experiences being a biologist or being an ecologist and a biologist, but in a general biology lab, and just wanting to know what the heck my peers were talking about. But it can also be really helpful for kind of like taking the lead and kind of being almost like an inspiration, or showing your peers that this isn't such a difficult thing and it can be really valuable. And maybe you're getting this out to other scientists, but it can also be going out to non-scientists, general non-scientists, or also out to journalists. And so, again, these are three audiences we kind of pulled out, but it could be much, much broader. So now that you've picked your audience, and it could be, again, one of these three or something more broad, you want to make sure that first and foremost you're speaking the same language. And this using clear, simple terms, providing context, avoid getting bogged down in the details, and avoiding jargon. And that's usually the big thing, is trying to avoid as much jargon as possible. And the thought is, but these are scientific manuscripts. This is where jargon thrives. And I completely agree with you. Science, like, we use jargon because that's what we use in our fields. But the point of plain language abstracts or summaries is to get rid of that jargon and explain your science in a way that really broad audiences can understand. And so when thinking about jargon, some things to potentially reduce or at least explain, really technical terms, undefined or excessive acronyms, really obscure words, unnecessarily long words, and one that I really never thought about until being in this line of work were words with multiple meanings. And these are things like, so we are AGU, so we're in the geosciences, but things like false or sheer or mean, model, some other ones like positive feedback, cycling. So there's a whole slew of different types of words that we use as scientists that have multiple meanings. And I'll note that in your GoToMeeting, in the thing on the right, there's actually a handout section, and under that, you can pull out a Watch Your Words handout that we made that has like 20 or 30 of these on it, and also that When is Science Newsworthy PDF as well. and someone just asked, is it possible to download the slides as a PDF? So after this webinar, we're going to, it's all going to be recorded, and we're going to send a link out to everyone of the recording, so then you can reference it later, because we have some links and things after that as well. Oh, and you can also take a screenshot of any of the slides as we're going through, and there should just be a little button on the top of your screen that says screenshot. So now that I've done a little bit about audience and about jargon, I'm going to hand it over to Olivia, who's going to talk specifically about what your messaging should look like.
Yeah, so just a few more tips about, as you think about how you want to present the message of your study when you're thinking about these audiences who are wider than those in your field. So first, you really want to think about, what is the study about? Obviously, you know what the study is about, and you've written, an abstract and the whole paper, in fact, all about it. But it's going to sound a little different depending on the audience you're talking to. So for example, a scientific abstract might begin with, there are few data in Chrysostria virginica physiological rates across the range of salinities and temperatures to which they are regularly exposed, and this limits the applicability of growth and production models using these data. So I took a stab at a plain language version. If we want to effectively predict the growth and health of commercially important eastern oysters, we need to know how their physiology changes in habitats that have different salt and oxygen concentrations. Now you notice I put a few things in red because this was a first pass at this, and I might try, if I could, to think of ways to rephrase even that plain language summary. Most people know what physiology is, but is there a way that I could frame that might be even more accessible or conversational? So it's not even always about eliminating words, just eliminating the words that people don't know. Sometimes it's also just about being aware of what people are going to feel more comfortable reading, and it's going to flow better for you. And then what did you find in your research? So especially if you're thinking about media, having an audience that's the media, they are going to tend to lead with what you found. And obviously you don't have to do that. You don't have to completely rearrange what you feel comfortable with and how you want to present your information. But you do want to think about emphasizing those elements of your findings that are going to be particularly newsworthy, going back to the information that Shane already gave. So just as an example, you can learn from the news about how to sort of present the punchier elements of your findings. So a research article title might be Quantifying the Daily Economic Impact of Extreme Space Weather Due to Failure in Electricity Transmission Infrastructure. This is describing what was looked at. A news headline about that study says, solar storm blackout could cost the U.S. $42 billion per day, and the highest economic fallout would impact regions outside the blackout zone. So this is information that they gleaned directly from the story. This is not sensationalism, but they're bringing to the forefront and emphasizing the findings that have the most relevance to people and are the most newsworthy. And then two, sort of connected to that, why does your research matter? And I don't just mean why does it matter to the field of science, because obviously it's advancing it. But you've already talked about, we've seen in the poll that you all see that the values of your audience are a major part of what's important as you're framing your messages. So, does this study and its findings matter related to people's health, the economy, future generations, education, national security, any of these issues that are really critical to most people and that many people care about? If there's a way to more explicitly make clear the connection between what you found and how it has that human or societal impact, that's going to make a real difference. Because a lot of people who are not within the scientific field are just not going to see those connections for themselves because they're just not used to making them. So the more that you can draw those connections yourself when you see that they are relevant and appropriate, the better in terms of letting people know what sort of, why this is important to them. And once you've actually developed a plain language abstract, you want to test it. You want to see if you have, in fact, been able to distill what you were talking about into an essence, a message that you really want others to understand. And we really recommend talking to someone, get a friend of yours who is not in science and ask them to read it. Maybe buy them a drink. You know, and if their response is something like this, clearly you did something and found something out at the end, then you know that you haven't gone as far as you could in terms of making it accessible. And I don't say this to make fun of anyone. This has happened to me. When we're in the field, we don't even always realize what remains inaccessible to those outside of it, or what could be made clearer. So really having somebody look at it with fresh eyes who's not familiar with any of the research can help a whole lot in giving you an idea of whether or not you've really made it plain language and accessible. And this does sometimes take time, right? I know that we're asking you to take more time after you've written the paper and written the abstract and, you know, gone through various reviews and revisions and so on. But I think it's demonstrated by the interest we see in this. I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but if you really want to reach other people, then it takes a little time to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's actually going to speak to them, so that not only will they be able to understand the words, but it will be able to have some resonance for them and for them to see the value of the study for themselves. And that's just hugely valuable. And if you're going to do it, then you might as well take the time, right, to really make it as effective as possible. And Shane's going to give you some examples of scientists who have done this really well.
Great. So one thing, and I should have mentioned this at the top, but AGU journals do this. They offer the option to write a plain language summary, and it's kind of why we're doing this right now. And a lot of our authors are taking the option to then do that. And so something that we have started doing in the Sharing Science program, so we have a Twitter account, we'll get to that in a second, but I started pulling out studies that we find that have plain language summaries and highlighting them in a way that is even more accessible by pulling out a line or two. So some examples that I have. So this was one about the Paris Climate Accord, but this is a direct line from it. This work shows considerable global economic gains from complying with the Paris Climate Accord for 139 countries. And you see author information, the DOI, but this is a line directly from the actual abstract. And then we would share this, again, for those of you who are on Twitter, we would share this using the hashtag SciSummary, and then it would link as well to the original manuscript. And so this is just one sentence, but this pulls out kind of the essence of what the manuscript was about, and especially what the abstract was trying to get you all to take home. The way that this is done, we only have so much space to do this, so sometimes we'll shorten it, but we're not making anything up. And so for an example is, so planning for hurricanes by increasing resilience and preparing for contingencies is essential, but not adequate in many areas. Again, this is pulled straight from the abstract, probably some things, examples pulled out in between where you have the ... but the essence is still there. And this is plain, this is clear, but it also gets across the gravity of the situation and the manuscript itself. Again, for space, folks actually would spell out what an ROV is, but for these purposes, combined ROV data with a computer simulation to determine how oxygen is spread around the Northwest Arabian Sea throughout different seasons and monsoons. Again, just another example of a clear message from an abstract, and you can from a plain language abstract, and you can get what the paper is going to be about. And broad audiences reading this would understand, be able to understand exactly what they were talking about. Now, again, like Olivia was mentioning earlier, there's always ways to be more clear. Perhaps the inclusion of ROV and not spelling that out specifically could be an issue. But overall, or even like what a simulation, but overall, this is much plainer than and much more accessible than a normal scientific abstract. And one of the clearest ones we've come across is if the stripe of strong ice is growing weaker, Larsen C may soon be history. Again, we could have gone through and physically defined what Larsen C is, but it's from the imagery and from the line in the abstract, and just reading through the rest of the abstract, it's very clear. It demonstrates what's in the science that's done in the manuscript, and it allows folks reading it to really get what they're talking about. And so if you are looking for some examples, and we've tried to highlight some good ones, you can check out this hashtag. You can do it whether you have a Twitter account or not. And we try to feature 1 or 2 a week usually. All right, so we're kind of giving you this very brief introduction to plain language summaries, plain language abstracts. So now what do you do with it? And for that, we'll talk to Olivia.
Sure. Certainly you can, in fact, talk to me if you want to. There are ways that you can reach me. But also, we have a couple of links. So we have online resources that we've created on developing plain language summaries. And there are also others. You'll see this before the abstract.com resource as well. And feel free, again, to screenshot if you want to get these images. But again, we'll be archiving this webinar too. So if you don't have a chance to do that and you still need these links, they'll be available once we've archived that webinar, and we'll let you know when that's available. So you can look over those resources for a few more details and guidelines. Another thing to do, and this, you know, you certainly don't have to do this. This is a radical technique, but some of you may be familiar with the Upgoer 5, which is a cartoon done, a comic done by Randall Munroe of XKCD, who described the Saturn V rocket using the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And since then, a text editor has been developed that will highlight, will underline any words that you use that are not among the 1,000 most common in the English language. Now, this is obviously many, many fewer words than you would actually be using, than you should actually be using. But if you're having real trouble getting past the jargon or figuring out how to get your abstract down to its essence, this is a good exercise to break everything down to its absolute most simple parts, and then you can build it back up from there into conversational, everyday English. So that's just another, you know, suggestion if you feel like something a little fun, a little challenging, from which you can build up into a plain language abstract. And if you're interested in, a number of you mentioned these other audiences that you're interested in communicating with, either through these abstracts or beyond, we have a lot of resources through AGU on connecting with a variety of audiences beyond the scientific community. So I encourage you to check out our website to look into more of that if that's something that interests you. We're also on all the social media, so feel free to follow us on any or all of those. The Instagram account also features a lot of takeovers by scientists who are in the field. So that means that there are people who are out or have just returned from doing various work who take a lot of pictures and try their best in the captions to explain simply what they're doing and what kinds of questions they're asking and why. So that's another really great example, I think, of how people are trying to present their research in that plain language. And also we have a podcast through AGU, Third Pod from the Sun, during which we look at sort of the methods and lives of the scientists behind the science. And you can hear there, too, examples of how people are talking about science and explaining what they look at in a way that's really intended to be very accessible. Also, it can be a lot of fun. So again, please visit our website, follow us. If you are interested, again, in communicating more widely in general, feel free to join the Sharing Science Network. This is a group of people who are scientists who are interested in wider science communication and policy. We give you a monthly newsletter. We don't spam you. And you have a closed online community through which you can talk with others of your peers who are also interested in this. So you have a bit of a community to work with. It's not just us talking to you. And with that, I think we'll go to questions. I think we have some already, but if you have a question about any of this, please use the questions box in your control panel on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can in the time remaining. I'm just going to wait a minute to see what we have and what we can address. So please feel free to enter some questions.
Hey, I'm going to just jump in here because I'm also looking at the questions. I see that there was a question here. Hi, this is Nathaniel, for those of you who didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but I've been doing the technical side on the back end. There were some questions about which plain language summaries you highlight and how you pick those.
Yeah, I can take that. So, we do it a couple ways. One's just kind of, I guess a few ways. One's just kind of things we come across. So we're scanning AGU journals every here and there, and we might come across something that's really fascinating and it's a good abstract. That's the least efficient way of doing it because we have 20-some journals, and that's a lot of manuscripts. We pull them from press releases oftentimes. So a lot of our scientists and a lot of the science that is featured in our press releases often have plain language summaries, plain language abstracts, and so we'll pull them from there. But also, if you're published in an AGU journal and you wrote a plain language abstract, send it to us. You can just send it to our Sharing Science email address, and we're happy to often create these little cards and push it out via social media as well. And so, yeah, there's a few ways, but if you think that you have a good one, or if you just even want us to maybe give some tips and on how good they are, we're always happy to chat with folks about this.
And just to connect to that, I see that we had another question asking if I'm assuming that means AGU, only highlights the press AGU abstracts that provide a plain language abstract. No, absolutely not. Our public information office, that's sort of our press office, they find papers across the journals, they read the abstracts, they'll read the articles themselves, and that helps them determine which ones to highlight to the media. So it's not based on whether or not you've provided one. If you provide one, however, that can often help, just because it might help journalists who stumble across these on their own, better understand what your study was about.
We got another one. Is there a document related to words used in writing in abstract and plain language? This would be a good opportunity to check out the couple links that were a couple slides ago, and actually since we're just doing this now. So these links, we have more information here, and there are some guides, there's some more long form examples, and I don't know these offhand, but we're not the only society doing this. And so I imagine just even some quick Google searches on plain language, abstract, advice, suggestions, that type of thing, which would throw up a lot of really great stuff. But this is kind of what we have right now.
Someone has asked if we can recommend any tools for nice visualizations, including schemata to visualize processes. If this is visualizations related to the data themselves, there's going to be a webinar on that September 20th that's going to be talking about data visualization, both related to posters and just in general. If you're referring to visualizations around the process of developing the abstract, that we do not have. But again, in September, there'll be a whole webinar about data visualization, if that helps. And you can go to webinars.agu.org to find out more.
Since I'm on here, we actually did something that was on like creating figures for scientific posters last October. I'm going to share the link in a second when I find it. It's not quite exactly the answer to what they're looking for, but if you're just like trying to find some software to help yourself make visualizations, there were some suggestions in that. As far as like just being able to easily make visualizations, I mean, like for example, Canva, I think is pretty easy and very easy to do for free, should you want to, and or if you're just doing it on your own, not as an organization.
We got another one about some of the examples that I listed. So some of these seem to be stating the questions, but not really results and conclusions. And yeah, that's completely true, because the abstract itself would have gotten more into that, and it was a good plain language abstract. Because of the way that we are like creating these images and creating these tools, we only have limited space. And so sometimes it makes sense, just in the way that we're presenting it on this is mainly social media, to put up one sentence that really tells what the study is about. We oftentimes try to get the concluding sentence in there, but sometimes it takes a couple sentences or a few, like Olivia said, just by making things more accessible and more plain. That doesn't necessarily mean you're just shortening things and cutting out all the long words. So just for the examples that we're putting up, the sentences we're choosing are more of a logistical thing and less of a reflection of how good the plain language abstract was. And that's why we include links to the original abstract and the DOI and all that information as well.
Yeah, so let me say, I mean, we certainly think that they were good plain language summaries. That's why we're highlighting them. But we only have the room, as Shane said, in the social media to highlight a line from it that we think shows how nice and clear it is. But definitely, yes, the actual abstract should go through the whole thing. You know, why you did it, what you found, what it means. Someone has asked how to effectively communicate with policymakers as opposed to just sharing on social media or using plain language generally. Yes, that is a whole other category, and I would really encourage you to go to the sharingscience.agu.org website. We have a ton of resources that also go into our policy area that talk precisely about the best ways to talk with policymakers. And if you have more specific questions, we can address those as well. But I mean, in those cases too, it really is also, some of the same rules apply. You want to know your audience, right? You want to know about what their values are. So what region do they represent? And what do they care about there? What are the major issues in that area? You know, what committees are they sitting on? What bills have they voted for and against or brought forth in legislature? So you can get a sense of what their main values and concerns are and connect your science or whatever request you're making of them to what you know already matters to them and to their constituents.
And honestly, by creating a plain language abstract, that might be a really helpful tool for you to then, like, as a first step, then get your science into terms that, say, a policymaker would be interested in. So maybe you're not directly distributing, you're not handing a manuscript to a legislator, which should never be done. But by doing that, by going through this process of thinking about just how to take literally your really technical science jargon and put into plain language, that could be one step in then further kind of distilling your science into a way that is accessible, attractive, and understandable to policymakers.
And I should say that among our resources, we also have some guidelines for how to develop a one-page, what's called a leave-behind document, that, like a plain language abstract, is just going to highlight specific aspects of your science or the message you want to convey. Okay. There's also a question, any thoughts on including full citations in abstracts is integral to research? If you're talking about plain language abstracts, then I would say don't do it. They may very well be integral to your research, but so is a lot of what you're including in your full paper. That's why you have a whole paper that you've written. In the plain language abstract, these citations are not really going to mean much to your audience, and they're going to probably get in the way of the flow and the understanding and accessibility that the abstract would have. I think, one thing that I'd say is I think a couple of people have asked questions asking how to make sure that their new and exciting science really does get covered by journalists. And, again, writing a plain language summary is a good start for that, because you're going to make sure that it's the most accessible version. But also reach out to your public information officers. So almost every university or other research institution has a public information office, sometimes called a comms office or a press office or a media office, but one of those. And it is the job of the people there to help develop press releases that highlight the science that's coming out of the organization. So these are people who would definitely be happy to help you with this. Also, if you publish in AGU journals, contact our public information office, because they're always interested in learning about papers and studies that are going to be coming out that are newsworthy. And I just say you need to give a lot of lead time if you want to work with public information officers or other such officers and get a press release out. So really contact them. You can contact them as early as when you submit the paper. I know that seems really precipitate in some cases, like you're jumping the gun, but they understand that they're not going to put anything out there until your paper gets accepted and it goes out. But if they want to be able to have a press release to go out on the same day as your paper, then they need that time to work with you to develop a release that you're both happy with. So that's another way to make sure that you're highlighting the science that you think is really valuable.
We got a technical question. What's the max word count for AGU lay summaries? So they're currently at 200 words, and our normal the normal abstracts are at 250. So it is a few more words, or excuse me, a few less words. And yeah, so that's where we're at right now. So it's 200 words. So it's a good exercise in not only like reducing jargon and that sort of thing, but really potentially reshaping what's important, or really pulling out what's important. It's not necessarily about replacing kind of words for words just to make words more understandable, but maybe more about making sure the message gets across. And if that contains like a completely different set of words in a different order of writing things, that's fine, because it's what you're really worried about is getting, or should be worried about, is getting your message across.
And there's a question about where are the plain language summaries published online? Yes, it is where the paper is published. So I think can't remember if it's immediately below or above, immediately below the scientific abstract, then again, because the plain language summaries are optional, but if someone has written one, it is immediately below the scientific abstract, and it's published with that paper and with the abstract on the same page. And someone else said that it's really hard to communicate to other audiences and think about what they might need, and if we could shed some light on it. Yeah, it is. It really is. I agree. And it takes time, and it takes practice, and sometimes you have to do things over again. That's why we encourage you talking to people you know who are not in the sciences to sort of test this out. And again, please take a look at our resources. We have a lot of archived webinars that go into more detail on knowing your audience and thinking about how to frame messages that are going to resonate best with them. We have a lot more information on working with media. You know, again, contact us at the sharing-science@agu.org email address if you have other specific questions that you think we can help you with. Because it is hard, and we appreciate that all of you want to do it. It's really valuable and really important, and getting the story out there from the scientists who know why their studies are valuable is just so critically important. If it's still possible to submit a plain language summary, you can submit one as you are submitting your paper, I believe.
Yeah, so if you submit to, at least for AGU journals, there are other journals out there who are doing this, and we don't know their processes. But for AGU journals, when you submit, you can submit a plain language summary. But once it's published, I don't believe it's possible to kind of retroactively. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, at the time of submittal before publication, you can get your plain language summary in.
And yeah, I think those are all of the questions that we had. So thank you all very much. And this will conclude our webinar for today.
Thank you all.